Welcome everybody to the latest Showrunner Huddle, our every other week Q&A, which we greatly enjoy. I'm Jared Morris. I'm here with Johnny Astor, and Johnny is joining us all the way from Europe while you're on your, what are we calling this? It's not a vacation, but it's not really work. It's like conferences.
Yeah.
Is there a term for that? I kind of feel like there should be, because there's, especially people in our industry, I feel like there are more of those where folks try to combine like a vacation with, you know, a work conference and networking opportunities. So you're kind of working, but not working, and you're also vacationing.
Right. Like lots of working as in like talking and like meeting people and like planning stuff, but not actually like sitting at a computer working.
Right. You're not like executing. It's more big picture
Not at
stuff.
all.
You're building relationships.
Yeah, I'm staying away from the execution stuff right now. So we'll call it. It should somewhat be vacation. Tomorrow and the next day won't be, but otherwise, once Monday hits, the next 4 days will be the last 4 days.
Vacation.
Total vacation. Like, but I mean, I've seen some amazing sites. Like we've gone and seen tourist things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's amazing.
How many episodes ahead did you get when you left?
12. No.
12.
12? No, 10. I'm missing 2 spots I had to cancel. I couldn't do. I didn't have enough interviews, actually. I'm completely out of interviews. I was so kind of busy, like just doing all the interviews, that I never got far enough ahead again as well to be far enough. So I just had to cancel some ad spots and move them into like August.
Interesting. So you got to get right back on the horse as soon as you get home then, huh?
Oh yeah, I get home like Friday night next week, and the following Tuesday I just scheduled like I just approved another. I think I have like 7 or 8 interviews that first Tuesday back, which is going to be kind of a nightmare that day. But at the same time, it'll feel good to have like 2 weeks already done, like ready to go.
Yeah.
So my editor, who I took out for dinner and I met in Lisbon, which is really cool. The guy who's edited my last 200 episodes. So that was really cool. Got to meet him. And so him and my publishers, they're kind of doing it still live, like sort of thing. Like they didn't get all the way ahead, because I literally was like the day before I left, I'm like, here's 8 episodes.
Yeah.
so
very cool.
It feels good. It feels good to just like, oh, it's Thursday today kind of thing. And just like, look, and there's my episode. It looks perfect.
Yeah. It's nice. It's nice when that happens.
It feels good.
All right. So let's get to Ian's question here. It's a really good question. So Ian says, my podcast and newsletter this week were very popular. It was a response to Orlando, and it really resonated with my listeners. I'm thinking about buying some Facebook ads to promote it more widely. Curious if you have other places you promote particularly successful post episodes. So I actually think that there are 2 questions in here. So, and I want to get to like kind of this broader question of how you promote particularly successful posts and episodes. But I want to cover something else, which is, what do you do when you have content that is really popular, but it's about kind of a sensitive subject, like the Orlando shooting? And the reason I say this is I had an email in my inbox today. This is a subscription that I've had for a while. And it was from somebody who, you know, the title was something about Orlando. I don't remember exactly what the title is, but, you know, I read it, and she was like, you know, I live, you know, near Orlando, and I have some thoughts on, you know, the Orlando shooting. I'm thinking, okay, well, this could be, you know, kind of interesting. And so I went over and clicked over to the blog post, and it was really, really short. You know, it wasn't all that substantive. And then it, you know, said something at the end. It was like, you know, if you want to show your support for the Orlando shooting victims, you know, tweet one of these statements. And it had like 5 sentences with little click to tweets next to them. And when you did the click to tweet, then it had, you know, her Twitter handle in it, and then the hashtag Orlando Strong. And I'm going to be curious to get your insight on this. For some reason, it rubbed me the wrong way. It rubbed me as kind of self-promotional, as, and not just self-promotional, but kind of riding on the back of a tragedy to kind of promote yourself, which always just seems kind of sleazy. And I get there can be a fine line there, because if you have something really worthwhile to say, you want to say it, and you need to promote it. And sometimes it can just look like you're trying to take advantage without really taking advantage. So I think it's in how you do it. But do you have any insight, Johnny, or best practices on how to promote content, especially when it's about a sensitive subject, you know, a controversial subject, or like this, just a truly devastating topic? because I think you can come across really tone deaf, and you can come across as really just being opportunistic in a bad way if you're not careful.
Yeah. I mean, for what I podcast in entrepreneurship, I would 100% stay away from it because it would just be opportunistic for me. First of all, it's kind of weird because I'm disconnected from Orlando. Like I'd heard about it, but it kind of just, that was it. And I think if I was in North America still, it would be a really big thing to me, and I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy tragedy. So it's a really, really, really extreme example. So it's hard to, like, I mean, obviously popular topics like the Super Bowl is coming out or something, and do a show around it and take, like, kind of join in the fun, right? And the merriment, and like people all excited about something.
Okay, so take Prince dying then. Like, let's use that as an example instead. You know, like the death of somebody popular. Is it okay if you have content about them to pay for ads to promote it? Or is that somehow kind of like, dude, you're like promoting content about someone who died? Because you see this happen. Or is it, am I making too big a deal?
I mean, Rolling Stone magazine, every magazine that's going to come out that could possibly, like Time, everybody's going to put Prince on the cover because it's going to sell magazines. So is it wrong to do things that could like be popular? I think with the Prince thing, no, it's totally fine. And the whole thing with buying ads, though, I personally would never drop $500 to promote an episode. That there's no way that I know, and I'm not an expert on Facebook ads, but there's no way that I know that you can just get people to listen to or subscribe to an episode and have proof that that happened. Like, I can send them to a page and then hope that they, you know what I mean? So it's a really expensive sort of thing to I think, be trying to go out. You might pay $5 for somebody to listen to or start listening to an episode. So I mean, there's places though, like Ian, like there are places where you can go and promote popular things like Reddit. Reddit's a massive place full of millions of people. And if you get into the right subreddit and just mention this and mention why, like, and try and not be self-promotional, but try and just tell what it's about and why you think that it has a meaning, and maybe you want to start a discussion around it, or what the discussion has been around it from your existing audience, then by all means. I mean, in my space, there's like Product Hunt. I put shows on Product Hunt quite a bit, and they do sometimes take off, and it's great. Reddit, I'm on Reddit all the time, and sometimes I see somebody mention one of my episodes, and it's awesome. And I see it directly come from analytics because there's a lot of people there. There are forums, there's places where your audience kind of is. Product Hunt is where my audience is for a big portion of them. And then like subreddits like of entrepreneurship and stuff are places where my people are. So there are different places. Like, I'm not going to tell you not to buy Facebook ads. I mean, if you have $500, you just want to try it on, but it's not cheap. Like, you can't put $5 and expect to see anything. You can't put $50 really. Like, it takes optimizing, it takes going. Facebook's supposed to be sort of a longer process. So if you really feel strongly about the subject and you feel that it needs to get out there, then by all means, I would never tell you not to do it. I would just obviously read some stuff, learn about Facebook ads a bit, and then go for it. But anywhere you can kind of get that mention, like, so there's, for Reddit, if you don't know what Reddit is, it's supposed to be the front page of the internet, and there's like hundreds of thousands of different subreddits, every single topic you could possibly ever want to talk about, and so that's where I would be heading, Ian. Because if your show gets slightly even picked up there as a thing, and obviously, Ian, if you know Reddit, then you know that people don't like self-promotion. But maybe you know somebody else in a subreddit with you or something that they could promote it, or just at least mention it. Because you can easily get 50 people or 100 people or 200 or 500 or 1,000 people, like, instantly will just be like, yes, I want to check this out.
Be a good thing to use the community for. Ask, hey, is there another Redditor on here who could submit this for me?
That's the kind of thing you don't really want to do it yourself. Like, even when my book came out, like, part of our launch progress was like finding people on Reddit that were into what I was doing and what my book would mean. And so they went to Reddit and promoted it. Because if it's me doing it, it's kind of, well, it's not Reddit style. So by all means, if you know Reddit already, I would find a way onto Reddit in as many places as you can, not in a self-promotional way, but in a, this is cool content. People love it, because you have a way better chance of hitting a bigger audience 100% for free than you are on Facebook. But if you really want to do Facebook, by all means, go for it. But it's going to be expensive.
So I agree with you on the Reddit part. I'm going to disagree a little bit on Facebook. And actually, from some anecdotal evidence that we have at Rainmaker Digital, we've started promoting individual podcast episodes. And by the way, we're going to start doing this with Showrunner, especially when we get these mini courses ready and when we're ready to kind of reopen the course. But basically, to give you an example, so Brian promoted up the episode of Henry Rollins, the episode of Unemployable they did with Henry Rollins. And they were very specific with the targeting. So they only targeted people who were on mobile devices and who were using Apple. And he promoted the Henry Rollins episode, but with just the link to the Unemployable page. So when people went there, they went to iTunes, and the Henry Rollins episode was the #1 episode. And he got a bunch of subscribers from that. And actually, like for the longest time on our Rainmaker.fm network page, you know, it was like Copyblogger.fm, Digital Entrepreneur, Showrunner, Hack the Entrepreneur had always been the top ones. And that bumped Unemployable all the way up. And it actually got him back up into the top 10, I think, in careers and advice, where he had been, you know, kind of down, I think, in the 50s or the 60s before that. And so, yeah, now, obviously, you know, that kind of took some time and a few iterations to figure out. But that's the kind of thing, Ian, you know, you can go in there and you can, you know, for $5, you know, your first time, you may not get a lot of results. But if you can kind of find a strategy like that where the path has already been paved, that can help. You know, and the other thing, I had I think I've told this story before, when I was using Facebook to build the Assembly Call email list. You know, to do that, I think I ended up spending 30 some bucks, and we got several hundred subscriptions and a conversion rate of about 60% from people who went to the site and then converted. So now the only way that's going to happen is if you can really dial in your audience. So like with the Assembly Call audience, I really know that audience. I mean, I'm going all the way down to the interest, you know, of Indiana, and, you know, really specific keywords. With that one, I didn't do geography, but I have on some other ones, which has worked. You know, and same thing with Brian. Like he knows the unemployable audience really well. And then targeting even further where it's like down to the device that they're using, because his whole goal was, I want to use this as a strategy to bump up my iTunes rankings. Oh, and here's the other thing. He targeted that episode against people who like Henry Rollins. So Henry Rollins already has an episode on Facebook. Yeah. So he targeted against them. So when you have an opportunity like that and you can really get that granular with your targeting, now Facebook is a great place to go. So when it comes to Orlando, you know, something like this, we'll use Orlando as an example. You know, obviously it's going to depend on what, you know, your topic is about. Like if it's Henry Rollins talking about Orlando, you would want to target Henry Rollins. If it's general about Orlando, you know, maybe you target Orlando specifically, but that's such a national story that maybe you don't. Maybe, you know, if it's something about gun control, you can target people who follow the NRA, you know. And so there's ways that you can get granular, and it's all going to depend. And I think if you can go, you know, 3, 4, 5 levels of granularity, right, where you know, like, okay, we're targeting, you know, this against this person's audience, we're going to do these devices because our goal is, you know, to really increase what we're doing in iTunes. Now I think you could really get some value out of it. And then I think it's a great way when you have a successful episode. So Jamar said, you know, what are general best practices to get the most out of popular breakout episodes? I think paid advertising is a great strategy. Why am I getting feedback? Are you hearing that?
Sounds good to me. No.
I don't know. Okay. I'll try to talk through it. Did you just adjust something? It's so weird. Okay. It's better now. Okay. So, yeah, Ian said he was getting feedback too. Hopefully it's gone. So, yeah. Okay. So, you know, what's great about paid advertising is that it supercharges really good content. So when you have something that you know is good, now and your audience, been proven with your audience, it's like, crap, I got to find more people like my audience. And that's what paid advertising really allows you to do. And so, and I know Will is here watching. What's up, Will? We're going to start doing this more actually with the Assembly Call and with the Bears Brothers, which are a couple sports shows that we host, which is, you know, after a big game or when someone makes a particularly good point on a show, what you can do is pull that out into like a 30 to 60 second ad, and you can turn it into a video ad that'll work really well. And, you know, either if you have the video, maybe you just take the video of it, or you do a voiceover and then have some text that shows what you're saying. And now you can use that video ad to promote the show or promote that episode and pay for that. So that's another really good way to do it. But I think you guys are thinking along the right lines, because when you have a piece of content that you know is good, that next question should be, how do we find more people in our audience to find this? Reddit will give you traffic, good traffic. And if you're in the right subreddit, you can find really good targeted traffic. But you're probably going to get a lot of drive-by traffic in there too. And that's okay if a certain percentage of that sticks with you. With Facebook, it's not free like Reddit. You're going to pay for it. But if you can be smart with your targeting, you can really, for not a ton of money, you can see some pretty good results there. So, and we'll talk about that more as we move forward. I'm actually putting a course together for it inside of Digital Commerce Academy, so I'll have a lot more to say about it as we move forward. But those are great questions.
I really want to know how much it costs to get into the top 10 of my category.
Dude, try this.
It's reasonable?
Yeah. I mean, well, and especially for you, when you have a guest who's big enough to have their own audience. Because when you can target it, again, like you've interviewed Chris Brogan, you can target Chris Brogan's audience. When you can really do that, now you're going to get a lot of action.
It's clever.
Yes.
So I take back everything I said, Ian. Totally go all in on Facebook.
What's a good size audience to target? That's a great question. I mean,
well, what's Henry Rollins on Facebook? Let's see.
Yeah, you can go look at it. I mean, I think the thing is, it doesn't need to be as big as you think it does. A lot of times when I'm targeting the assembly call audience, I'm reaching like 500 to 1,000 people a day. So the audience itself might be much bigger and broader. It might be a 60,000 person audience, but I'm paying, and I've never spent more than $5 to $10 in a day for targeting, and so I'm going to only target a portion of that. But I think if you're doing audience research to see how big is this audience, should I start out with this? We had this question on the Digital Commerce Academy Q&A, and Brian Clark's general rule of thumb, he kind of hesitates to give it because it can be taken in the wrong way. But his general rule of thumb is about 100,000. You want a market of about 100,000 people. Now, there are all kinds of exceptions in there, but that's another reason why Facebook is a good tool, because you may say, I think there's a pretty good market for, female podcasters who are stay-at-home moms, and I really want to find those people. Well, test your hypothesis. Go into Facebook, and you might find, that there's 50,000 people like that. You might find that there's 100 people like that, and it's less than you think. So it can help inform those hypotheses, which helps out. And Ian asks, you say target against, and I'm not sure. I know I've started using that term. I didn't really understand what it meant either. So it would basically mean, let's say your episode is about Henry Rollins. So you're going to go in and you can actually target people who express interest in Henry Rollins, like people who like Henry Rollins on Facebook. And so your ad is going to be shown to people who like Henry Rollins. And it's one of those weird like advertising marketing terms when they say, target it against, because at least for me, coming from a sports background, I hear the word against, and I always think of it in like an adversarial nature. But that's just kind of what it means, is you're putting your ads up against, people who are interested in this topic. So,
yeah, I wouldn't worry about like the size of the audience. Like if Henry Rollins is your guest on that show and you want to promote it on Facebook, if Henry Rollins only has 1,500 fans, which he doesn't, but if he only has 1,500 fans, and then you can target to iPhone users from there and you get 750, don't worry about it. Target those 750 people, because the only way you're going to get a bigger audience is to get less specific and get people who like other things. And then
you're wasting money. Now you're wasting money. Yeah.
Totally. If you can get all 750 of those people and get in front of them and get even 10% of them or 20% of them to click through and listen, that's 150 super targeted people. Like those are the exact people that want what you have to offer. So just all you have to do then is, if you want, then you can like also target something else, but do it separately. Don't put it all into the same ad, because you will start paying more for things. The more targeted you are and more specific you are with your audience, the more you can get your price down. Because people will actually click on it, and they want to show ads that people are actually clicking So don't promote a Henry Rollins thing to like Justin Bieber's fan page, because it's not, people aren't going to be interested in it, right? There's going to be millions and millions of people, and so you'll think, wow, but I can get in front of millions of people, but they don't care about Henry Rollins.
But how much better would you make the world if you exposed Justin Bieber's fans to Henry Rollins? Like, we would be improving the world. Now, we'd be paying for it, but we would be making the world a better place.
That's true.
Justin Bieber's fans need to know who Henry Rollins is.
Right. So when our podcasts all get bought by Microsoft, like LinkedIn, for billions of dollars, then we can all put like hundreds of millions of dollars towards just converting Justin Bieber's fans. Until then, let's be targeted, people.
Yes. Let's put your altruism in your back pocket for now. Okay, so if you guys have any, so I wanted to discuss Jamar's question. I know, Jamar, we discussed it a little bit before, but I wanted to bring this out here because I want to get some of your insight on it, Johnny. And Jamar had questions. This was actually in the Digital Commerce Academy forum, but he had some questions about webinars and using different webinar stuff. And he was asking specifically about Google Hangouts on Air and how those can be used for webinars. And we did one webinar on there, that one, how to do a podcast in 30 days. We did that as a Google Hangout. Or did we do that as, we did it as Webinar Jam. And you used Webinar Jam, and I think there are some good qualities with it. We did test runs with it at Rainmaker Digital and decided to stick with GoToWebinar. But you can use something like Hangouts on Air, which, as I was explaining to him, we do for the assembly call, because you can embed that live on your site. It's got screen sharing capabilities. You can bring on guests. It's not the easiest and seamless experience for guests, especially if they're not used to Hangouts on Air. So be ready for that. Will and I have actually started doing test runs with our guests on the assembly call because we had too many issues where it was like, all right, show up 10 minutes before, and they couldn't get on. They didn't know what to do. And, we have a live show. So, we're having to delay the start, and it was a disaster. So I would say if you're going to do a live Hangout on Air and it's not a normal co-host that knows what they're doing, do a test run first, because Hangouts on Air can be tricky. People have issues with them. Just do a test first, and then make sure that the person is going to be doing the live show from where you did the test from. Because we actually did a test once with a guest, and then they were somewhere else for the live show, and there was like that was actually with Blab, and there was like a firewall issue, and it was all kinds of issues. So, but you can embed those live on your site. And then we were talking before we went live, if you want to use something like Rainmail, which is Rainmaker's integrated email service, or even whatever email service you're using, the one thing the biggest downside to using a Hangout on Air is if people are subscribed to you on YouTube, they will get an alert when you go live. But you won't get, like with GoToWebinar and even with Webinar Jam, where they have their default emails that get sent like an hour before and 5 minutes before. Those are really helpful, and they are huge for driving traffic to the live event. So if you're going to do that, I think you want to make sure that you find a way to get those people onto an email list. And we talked about this, have people either click a button and set it up with marketing automation, or have them register for your site so you can do this. Get them onto an email list with an autoresponder that thanks them, reinforces why they're going to the webinar, provides a link, all of that, and then have a blast scheduled for an hour before and probably 5 minutes before, reminding them, hey, we're about to go live in an hour, especially if it's Q&A. So you can remind them to submit questions, and then like 5 minutes before it goes live, hey, we're about to go live. That's what can be easily forgotten, and those are such important elements of actually getting people to show up for the event. What have you've been using Webinar Jam, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's been your experience?
To further expand on the question of Jamar's, what is he trying to do with the webinars? Are they like this, like Q&A, or are you trying to sell, or? Good
question. Because Webinar Jam does have some nice features if you're trying to sell.
If you're selling, I wouldn't. You can do it through just Google Hangouts, because you can take the YouTube video, or the Google Hangout, you can embed it onto your Rainmaker site on a separate page. You can then go somewhere else and get informational with Q&A. You can also get free chat software that they give you a code, and you put that code below the video so people can actually chat live below it like this. And you eventually want to sell. So Webinar Jam costs, I believe, $400 a year to do it, and it uses the Google Hangouts technology. It's just that it looks like Blab more so, where you can have a chat box on the side. You can put up an offer with a button on the side. It gives you analytics, and then like Jared said, it gives you all the pre-emails and post-emails, and it also sets up automatically. It'll just give you like a replay, and you can set up for how long you want that replay to be available for people. But all that stuff's automated for you, because if you start doing it a lot, it's a lot of extra work. So you kind of have to think. But I don't see a lot of people just doing Google Hangouts on air without embedding it onto their right. So with Rainmaker email list, you can definitely trigger it and set it up. And then, I mean, once you've done it once, kind of forever, you just change the text, obviously, and it'll be the same process. And then you'll just have to move your page from like how we have, I think we have rainmaker.fm/live. You would switch it over to a replay page if you want with a different link. And you could just manually do that. We take it down and we put it into the course, right?
Yep.
So it's also manually. But I mean, the reason why we use Blab for these kinds of things is just the simplicity of it. Hangouts on air is not simple. It's simple to have 2 or 3 friends on it, but as soon as you cross this 15-person threshold, it gets weird. And I've had it where it just doesn't work. And then I get people logging in, because I set it up on my site once, and people could hear me, then some people couldn't hear me, and some people could see the chat below, some people couldn't. And so I just went straight to Webinar Jam. But really, it's only worth it if you're going to start selling, because then the $400 becomes a worthy investment, because you will make more sales using something like that through it. But if you're just doing Q&A, maybe just keep it really simple and like use Blab or something if you can. It's just simplicity, right? It's simplicity. It's all these extra steps that don't seem like a lot, but they become a lot when you do these things often. And it's just, you don't want it to be like, oh, it's a burden to do. You want to have the Q&As and help your people. So,
yeah. E-Boy asked, can you recommend any contest sites? I can't, because I haven't used contest sites, although I do want to get into doing some more of that, because I think they can be a great way to grab emails. And I know there's lots of case studies. Like if you listen to Conversion Cast, which is a really good podcast, actually, if you want to learn more about conversion, there have been folks on there who have talked about contests they've used. Have you used anything for contests and giveaways?
No. SumoMe is the big one that I know of.
Yeah.
You can do the giveaway plugin, but you got to, again, pay for it. I think it's $100 just to use their contests. There's probably free ones. I'm thinking there's, like, if you're on a WordPress site, there's definitely WordPress plugins that can do contest giveaways for you. But I don't know, that the contest thing was really big like a year and a half ago, it seemed, but I haven't seen much of it lately. I think because it was like anything, it just got so many people doing it that they lost the effectiveness. So
now you could probably do it again and people would take notice.
Totally, exactly. So I would look for a WordPress plugin or something easy to set up and do, again, just to keep it simple.
By the way, this is kind of an aside, but somewhat related, I guess. I was listening to a recent episode of The Art of Charm, another really good podcast, and he had Cal Newport on, who, of course, is well known for talking about the value of deep work. And he was talking, one of his big points, and I love this point, is that there are less and less people now doing deep work for all of the reasons that we know. Distractions, there's just so much else going on, all these different things, which is why now the value of doing deep work is even greater. So because fewer people are doing it, you can actually stand out more by doing it, which makes, this quest that so many of us are on, especially those of us, who are into podcasting and, kind of into a lot of this, self-improvement and getting better and all of that. It kind of buoyed me. It got me even more excited and enthusiastic thinking about that, because it's true. There's, with so many people out there distracted and doing kind of half work and not really doing deep work, it is more valuable now. And when you look 5-10 years into the future, 15-20 years into the future, with how much stuff will be automated, it's the people who can do deep work and do the real deep thinking work and kind of go the next level, rather than just doing kind of the rote, repeatable stuff, that are going to be the ones that stand out, continue to have jobs, and make a big impact. So it's a good lesson. We know it, but maybe something else to internalize and actually act on. So
deep work is like deep work is literally just that, like work that is more deeper than the surface,
Exactly.
like more meaningful.
Exactly.
Things that take focus and time.
Mm-hmm. Synthesizing other ideas, instead, like you see a lot of blog posts now that will take an article, regurgitate it, put their spin on it. That would not be deep work. Deep work would be, deep work would be, like what Ryan Holiday did for Ego is the Enemy. Take over 2 years, you're reading all these books, you're synthesizing all this information, you're kind of coming up with something new, a new way to explain it, a new way to teach it. It's something new, a new idea. It's like, okay, virtual reality is coming, but the deep work will be, okay, what are the applications for virtual reality? Like, who will be the first person that takes virtual reality and combines it with online courses to create truly virtual online courses? Like, that's going to take really deep work to do that. So the people who can do that come up with the ideas and the strategies. There'll be so many steps of executing that'll probably be automated, but the big plan, the overall strategy, that's going to take a lot of deep work to come up with. And that's kind of what he's talking about, is that being able to really sit down and think deeply and work on those kinds of things. By the way,
cool.
Look what is now an actual thing.
Oh, man. That's awesome.
It's a real book. Dude, there's something kind of cool about getting a book and seeing your name on it.
Also, I'm just now realizing during this conversation that Will
DeWitt. Yeah.
Is also in this other conversation with us now.
He is, yes. He's working with us on the Showrunner. Yeah.
Before.
That's Will. Eventually he'll be on these huddles with us. He's doing a great job running his own shows.
That's awesome.
It is awesome. It is. All right, let us know if you guys have any other questions. I do have one from the Facebook group that I want to get to. So let me read this out. And Johnny, let me get your thoughts on it, because I know a few of us have responded already in the Facebook group, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. So here's the question from Monica. So question to the more experienced podcasters: can you damage your business with a podcast? She's afraid she's doing that. So she says, the good news is that I have eventually launched my podcast and meanwhile published 7 episodes. From those who listen to the podcast, I have gotten quite good feedback. However, this is the bad news. I'm afraid to damage my business with it. I'd already built a blog and a list and regularly sent out a newsletter before starting the podcast. Since I've started my podcast, the click-throughs have dropped to about 50% of the previous rate, not just once, but each time. The open rates are quite stable and in a similar range as previously. So the open rates are similar, but the click-through rates are a lot less. Last week, she asked her audience in a survey which format they want to hear from her. Results show just 18% want a podcast, and the 60% want blog articles or webinars. About 42% have opted for the current combo of podcast and blog article-like show notes. She sees some value in a podcast, especially connecting to other people in the field. Getting a guest interview for a podcast is much easier than getting one for a blog, and vice versa. She's now invited onto other podcasts, so she sees the opportunity to enlarge the audience in the long run, but she doesn't want to lose what she has. So she's considering several ideas. 1, just continue and watch the results for a longer period of time. 2, create an extra list for the podcast and for the blog and create extra content for the lists. 3, same as in 2, but with the same content. And then forget about the old list and just focus on getting new subscribers to the podcast. So, Johnny, what do you think, number 1, about this kind of bigger overarching question about can a podcast harm, kind of your reputation, your audience, what you're doing? And what do you think she should do about this dilemma of incorporating her old audience with this new medium of a podcast while at the same time wanting to attract new folks?
I don't think it can damage your reputation unless you're doing a terrible podcast, which I'm assuming, Monica, that you're absolutely not. But that being said, you have a blog of readers, and I think most readers don't want to listen to audio. The podcast, and the reason why your email opt-in rates have dropped is because they signed up for something, and there was some sort of handshake deal made when they gave you their email address for whatever blog content and written content you were saying you're going to give them, and now somewhere along the lines you started giving them audio content that they didn't ask for. So therefore, they're going to start being less engaged in that. Fully understandable. I would do the same thing. You probably would too if you signed up for a podcast and they started just sending you videos or only ebooks, something that you didn't ask for. So what I think you should do is, well, first of all, I think you need to absolutely trust your gut in the fact that you think that your audience right now isn't digging the show. And also you have some stats. So whatever option that was in there where you should just keep going and ride it out and see what the numbers tell you, I think you're not going to see any numbers that are going to change your gut feeling where you think that you're doing the wrong thing to the wrong audience right now. So you should trust that, but you should not at all stop a podcast. You should just use your podcast to go wide on iTunes and on Google Play and find new people for your business and your brand. Those people that come in should maybe be able to subscribe via email to just your podcast, or they can subscribe to the blog as like on a separate email if they want to. But give them the option, and you might be surprised that you'll build as big or bigger of an audience of people who love your audio versions of your content. But they're not the same people, and they don't have to be the same people. To me, really, the point of a show, especially in your instance, is not just necessarily to go deeper with your people, but it's to get new people that are never going to want to read content. Lots of people just don't want to read. Lots of people don't read. I don't know why. I don't usually don't trust those people, but I'm really into reading. And so I get why that is. I read way more than I listen to audio, except for music. I really do. I created a ton of podcasts, but I don't always listen to them because I don't always have time. But I can still really be into what you're talking about. I can still really be into your expertise, and I can still really be into what you do in your business. And I won't look at you and be like, oh, well, you have there's no way that if I was only into copy bloggers articles, which that was all that existed up until like a year and a bit ago, for the most part, like until Rainmaker.fm hit. But I don't think anybody in the copy blogger audience is like, oh, wow, they also do audio now, and like lower them in status. It doesn't happen. It's just there's a whole nother audience of people that love to consume it via audio. And they all, of course, get funneled into the main business. It's just different places to find people with different kinds of content. It's also why you can publish the same piece of content to Slide Deck, or you could go to YouTube, just with variations, or as we said with Facebook, it's people consume the same content almost, but in different formats and in different places. And those can all come back to your site. So trust your gut and don't try and force feed people that want to read your work. Don't try and force feed them audio. And don't send too many emails about it if they didn't sign up to get the podcast version, but really focus on building a new audience of audio people and bringing them all back to your site. They can be just as good as customers. They really can. You just have to treat them differently in the fact that they like to consume your work in a different way. That's it. They want the same work. They want it to be as good. They want it to be as valuable and as full of expertise and authority as possible, but they just want to consume it via audio.
You know what's interesting? It was interesting when we made the transition with doing more audio and doing more podcasts, because for 8 years we had really trained our audience to be readers. And Brian's a reader, Sonia's a reader, and naturally you're going to kind of attract what you are. And so we just had an audience that was very used to reading. And that's why really early on we realized that we needed to do transcripts, and we wanted to have those transcripts there for the readers. And when we took them away, there was a big backlash for the transcripts. And I think that was part of the reason. It was like we had set this expectation with our content, like we are reader friendly, right? Like that's just kind of what we do. But now we're making this decision. We're doing this thing that totally ignores the readers. And that's one of the reasons why we brought our transcripts back, actually. And I think this goes to what you were saying, which is, if you have this mismatch of expectations, if people sign up for one thing and then they get something else, or if they just, if you've trained them over time to think one way and to expect one way, and you suddenly shift it another way, there's going to be, you're going to have some natural drop off. And that's actually okay, because you can't let certain elements of your audience hold you back, but you've got to respect also the expectations that you've set and give people an on-ramp to come with you in this new place and not just expect them. And clearly Monica's not doing this. I think the fact that she's asking these surveys and being really sensitive to this shows that she's thinking along these lines, which is great. And I think you need to do that. I will say the other thing too, don't be alarmed by the lack of click-through rate once you shift to podcast emails. You cannot compare click-through rate in like a written email or a blurb that's clicking people to a blog post with the click-through rate for a podcast. And just think about how people consume this content, right? For most people, if you're clicking them over, if you have, maybe a long email, maybe it's 500 words, and maybe you're clicking them over to a full email after that, you just have the blurb. Well, they have to go click over and read it to consume that content. It's much easier than closing the email, going to the browser, pulling it up, and finding the link. However, for a lot of people who listen to podcasts, clicking on the link and going to your site isn't the way they like to listen to podcasts. For me, I don't do it that way. I'll use the email, like, there's certain podcasts I subscribe to, and I'll get their email, and I just use like Hidden Brain, for example. And I just use that as a trigger for, there's a new episode of Hidden Brain. Now I go to my podcast player and find it. Now, there's no way for Hidden Brain to know that. It just looks like it's an open, and then I didn't do anything, but it alerted me to go check that podcast. So it's a little bit tricky. You can't really trust click-through rates if your main goal with the podcast is just alerting people that there's a new episode. So just be a little bit careful there in how you judge those numbers.
Yeah, but I think that this is a perfect example of the like repurposing of content. If you are like a written content company, like that's what you're producing, and people are liking that content, making audio versions of that same content for people who would still be into that content but want to consume it in that way. So it's not like you're creating completely different content and it's like doubling your workload. To me, it's like only like 1.5 times your work, but you get double the audience potentially out of it. That's like real leverage of your work and your effort and your creation. So I would try and think of it in that way because of the fact that you are, I think, aware that your audience isn't reading and listening to everything you're putting out right now. They're kind of choosing their path. So those two things can almost be the same thing. And it doesn't matter because they're in different formats. So you can think of ways to do that and experiment with how close they can be, if not even the same thing coming out, but in different formats. And it'll make your workload a lot less cumbersome, but also building audience in a much bigger, faster way.
So can I share kind of an embarrassing story with you?
Ooh, I'd love it.
So we did another live episode of the Assembly Call on Wednesday night, and we had this guy named Kent Sterling on, and he's a radio host in Indianapolis, and he has me on every week for kind of like a weekly spot talking IU basketball, and so we figured it'd be cool to have him on the show. And so one of the things he does is he does like these top 10 lists every day. And, sometimes he just kind of like throws, stuff up against the wall. He kind of has these like outlandish ideas in these top 10 lists, right? And so I'm, so we're getting into the interview, and we're kind of doing the warm up questions a little bit, just to kind of get warmed up. And I phrased this question really, really badly. And I was asking about the top 10s, and I said something like, sometimes you'll say some kind of, crazy outlandish things in those. Do you always believe those things that you're saying? And he kind of took umbrage with this, almost like I was. And I totally get why he did, because I worded it really badly, and I didn't mean that. What I meant to say was, he's willing to kind of put these ideas out there that are just conversation starters, but they're reasonable in a sense. They're just probably not things that a lot of other people might say. But and it was great because he went on this little rant about authenticity and the importance of authenticity and never putting out there or saying something that you don't totally believe in. And I had to immediately backtrack. I was like, okay, I worded that question really wrong. I didn't mean that you didn't believe them. It was just you're kind of willing to start conversations that other people might not, because they might think that it's not really realistic. So they might not have it, but it's still an interesting conversation. I got kind of tongue-tied. Do you have any tips? And sometimes that just happens. You're in the middle of something and it just comes out wrong. Do you have any tips for how to, A, prevent that from happening, and B, how to, put the toothpaste back in the tube a little bit if, something comes out like that you've just totally misworded?
I don't think you can stop it, obviously. I mean, obviously, the more experience we all get, the less frequently that will happen, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
And then beyond that, I would just think don't we call that like, or don't you call that like primility? Like, just having like the humility and like the pride to admit that it was like, first of all, when I've done that, the person usually just like, they go and then they go into an answer. And so right then what I used to do was kind of interrupt them right away to like clarify, but it's like they're already over it and moving on and answering a good question. So let them finish. If it still feels like a thing 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes into it, whenever they're done, then be like, sorry, I hope that didn't come across as, and just obviously be like real about it, right? Like I didn't mean for it to come across that way. And by that point, they're like, oh yeah, no, don't worry about it or something if you need to. Because obviously admit your mistake if you made a mistake. But usually I like to just let it go. It's a conversation, right? So don't keep like interjecting and trying, and they're like, hey, get over yourself, dude. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, of course, most things we say, most things we do, like when we trip and fall, we think that everybody else had looked at us, and nobody ever did. We just think that everybody's looking at us. It's the same sort of thing, right? So try and just kind of whatever. And you know what I mean? There's no way around it, man. So just
it's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you make a complete ass of yourself or like you say something rude by accident, then by all means, like interject and apologize for it. And that can happen because you're in the middle of a conversation and you might even be a bit nervous, right, doing it, and so you kind of it's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to say that. Mm-hmm. So
okay, so let me ask you this: so what if let's we use the same example. Let's say there's different circumstances, and let's say he is kind of a shock jock, and he does kind of say things to just get a rise out of people, and you don't really know if he's being authentic about it. And so I ask him that question, and he takes umbrage with it and goes on this rant about authenticity, even though that rant about authenticity probably isn't authentic. Do I then lose face with my audience if I let it go, or do I need to kind of push it back a little bit?
I think you just answered it. I mean, if his rant is not authentic, I think the follow-up question should be that felt very inauthentic and that you were telling me what I think I want to hear. Yeah, if you have a shock jock on and you say something because you say that I literally think you just say things to do shock and to shock your audience into like paying attention to you, how mad can the guy get? Like really, like most shock jocks aren't going to be like.
But if he doesn't think that he is, though, that's what I mean. Like if there's a mismatch, and let's take this, let's make this more applicable. Let's say it's a Hack the Entrepreneur person, and you ask him a question, and it's a well thought out question, and maybe it's not a criticism, but it's just your honest view of what they do, and they take umbrage to it to the point where they make you look silly for having asked the question. Right now, do you need to come back and kind of provide some validation for why you asked that question, or do you let it go? And I'm sure it depends on the circumstance, but especially if because you don't want the interview to go off the rails, but you also don't want your interviewee to totally take control and kind of say stuff that isn't really an accurate reflection of what they think or what they do. They're just trying to look good in the moment because you called them on it.
Right. I'm trying to think of an exact example for you, but I mean, my whole thing is that when I ask you a question, like, what do you do or how do you think? Don't tell me how we're supposed to do it. Don't tell me what the book says. Don't tell me any of that. Just literally tell me what you do. And I do get people, they'll give me this long, big roundabout thing to totally avoid it. And as soon as they're done, if it's interesting, I'll let them keep going. Then I'll be like, all right, well, that was a great preface to avoiding my question, but now can you just tell me what you actually do in the morning for the first 30 minutes? And usually they're just like, oh, and then and it's almost like, because I don't think they're doing it intentionally even necessarily, you know what I mean? Like nobody wants to answer the tough questions. Yeah. Sometimes we want to kind of miss that, or else we're just used to it, or the last 3 interviews we didn't ask those or didn't push us to go to those places. And it's almost like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally did that. I've had literally people when I say, that was a good 3-minute preface to avoid my question. I've had people like laugh and like, wow, you're right, man. I totally avoided your question. And then they'll like, now we get into like a real conversation. So I think it is that. I mean, you can do it in like a self-deprecating way. You can blame it on yourself, or you can make a joke about it. Like, not just like, dude, you're being like a total jerk on my show. Like, obviously that's not going to help. Yeah. You know what I mean? So just kind of be casual about it. But I think that Yeah, I think it shows a professionalism, right? It's you know what your audience wants better than the guest does, or you should. And so it's your job to get them, right? It's that whole journey thing. And we have to get to these places. And if you're just superficially answering other questions that you wish I had asked, it's not going to take us where we need to go. And I think my audience appreciates it, and I think the guest appreciates it. I'm trying to think of the few that probably it really did derail at that point, and I just didn't release them. I just couldn't, because it was just like, then it gets confrontational. It's like, that's cool, man. Like, we don't have to do this. Like, this is just free for both of us. Thought it'd be fun, but we can't seem to get past it. And it's awkward, but whatever. I mean, I think you have to. I think you'll get respect from your audience, and you'll get respect from your guest. So definitely, man. Do it in the most tactful way that you can. If it's just you asking a jackass question, then sorry. Say you're sorry. Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Unless the conversation completely rolls on, then don't bring it up again, because it's just a waste of time.
Yeah. So Monica just showed up. Monica, it is great to see you. We spent about 10, 15 minutes covering your question from inside the Facebook group. So there'll be a recording, and you can watch that. It's at about the 37-minute mark. Let's give her a quick summary since she's here live, and maybe she can provide a little bit of follow-up. But you want to quickly summarize your point, Johnny, about how you're not going to damage your reputation from doing a podcast, but there might have been this expectation with your previous audience about the content you're doing, and now you're looking at a new audience, but you can actually use those as strengths instead of weaknesses.
Yeah, and so it's absolutely right, Monica. You can't damage your reputation, but if you try and force people who want to consume text-based content to consume your audio content now, I think you're like barking up the wrong tree. That's what I was looking for. But what you want to be doing is using this audio content to find a new audience. That's what iTunes is for. That's where 85% of all of our listeners will come from. And so use your best content in text and make audio versions of it and promote it on iTunes to get you another section of an audience that is into audio content. Just as valuable, they just don't like to read. And just like your readers don't like to listen to audio, we shouldn't try and force to change those people to consume the content we want them to consume. Just make the same content in different formats so that you can send it to different places to bring those people all back to your site, and let them further consume more audio if that's what they want, or more text if that's what they want. There's going to be some crossover. I listen to podcasts and I read, but if I had to choose one or the other, I would be all in on text only. It's how I learn better, I think. I love podcasts for like walking and doing stuff, but give me a book, give me my Kindle, give me a PDF, to me, that's how I really do like to consume it. I like to read emails, those kinds of things, but not everybody does. Most of my audience likes audio. That's just what it is. And so don't try and make it so that, don't think of it as the fact that you're just creating brand new content for your same existing audience in a different format and trying to give it to them. Try and just create your best text, make it an audio version, and send them to different places so that they can all end up back on your site. And the main thing, Monica, is I don't think that you need to do more work or more research into this. I think you really need to trust your gut and trust the numbers and the results you've got so far, and just know that you shouldn't keep trying to force your readers to listen to you.
But don't overrate the click-through rates on podcast episodes and emails. That's exactly the only thing. That's the only number not to trust, simply because of the nature of how people listen to podcasts. Most podcast listeners aren't going to click through to your link and listen on your page. They're going to see it and then go listen in their favorite place. So it might be on their podcast app on their iPhone, whatever podcast app they use. So you want to get them to subscribe and maybe put links to all the different places they can subscribe. But even then, don't trust the click-throughs, because once I subscribe on iTunes once, I'm not going to click through in iTunes on your link. I'm probably just going to go open up my iTunes app, make sure I've downloaded it, and then listen whenever I can. So that's the only stat that may throw you off.
I personally don't even subscribe to any emails of podcasts, because I've subscribed on my phone, and I'll get it. Like, that's the beauty of it. It's like blogs used to be with RSS feeds and Google Reader and stuff. you published something, and there it was. It showed up for me. It's like, oh,
well,
now
see,
I
that's something to remember. This is important to remember when people are talking to us about what do they do with their email list and how do you get people on your email list. You've got to do more than just provide the link. So I talked about Hidden Brain. The reason why I subscribe to Hidden Brain is because when they have a new episode that comes out, they've got a curated newsletter that comes with it. So there's, links that are appropriate to that episode. They've got other discussions in there, so it makes it worthwhile for me to subscribe to, while also reminding me that a new episode is there. So you got to do more than just provide an update for the episode, because that's just not really it's not providing a whole lot of value. And you may then get discouraged because the emails aren't doing anything, because they're not really useful, and any metrics you can get for them can't be tracked after someone might see your email, just the subject line, and they say, oh, cool, there's a new episode. They delete it without ever opening it, but you'll never know, so it's just, so it might have some purpose there, but if you really want to do something good with your email and give people a reason to subscribe, do more with it than just the episode update. Cool.
Yeah.
But we've come to the end of another huddle. Johnny, what fun. Yeah, no, you're welcome, Monica. Thank you for coming. What are we looking out on right now?
Out of my apartment. I can't show you.
Did you guys get an Airbnb? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
totally.
nice.
Yeah. I had one in Lisbon and now one here.
I love
it's the only way to go, man. So good. Yeah, it's so good. I really like it.
Beautiful. Well, have fun in Lisbon. Post some more pictures on Facebook of your travels and fun stuff that you see.
Will do.
Cool.
Not from the party tonight. I won't post any pictures.
Never post pictures from a party. What happens in Lisbon? I always want to say Libsyn. What happens in Lisbon stays in Lisbon.
I know. So yeah. I'm in Barcelona now. But totally. Right. I was saying Libsyn too. But
you're a podcaster if you're in Lisbon and call it Libsyn. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Johnny, thanks for joining us.
It was a blast. Thanks for
having me. I'll talk to you next week. All right.
All right.
See you, everybody.
Take care, everybody.